Hi, I'm Anna the Wolfe, and welcome to another transformative tale. And today, you and I have decided to meet downtown for a cup of coffee and just catch up because it's been a long time since we've sat and had a chat. And so we decided to get a table outside and are kind of close to the sidewalk, and it's just really great. You ask me what I've been up to and what I'm up to these days. And I said, you know what? Actually, I'm really leaning into being a storyteller. And I just love being a storyteller. And you're like, yeah, well, that makes sense. You're a wolf. And, wolves always love telling stories. I'm like, yeah, I know. I didn't really do what I was supposed to be doing for a long time. So it feels good, It feels really good. And I'm like, so what is it you've been up to? And you're like, well, then you looked off to the side a little, and I'm like, no, really, come on. I mean, you've been good at so many things. I'm wondering what you're up to nowadays. You actually have a glow about you like I've never seen before. And you're like, oh, stop. I'm like, no, really, I'm going to have to go on because that twinkle in your eye tells me you've been up to something. You're like, okay, well, it's really in its infancy. And the reason you haven't heard about it is because I haven't told anybody yet. I haven't breathed a word of it into the world. I'm just really feeling uncertain about it. And I don't even know if I'm really going to do it or not. But I feel called, like I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do, and it's just a big risk. And I'm like, come on, tell me. And you're like, no, you know what? You're brave. You're a wolf. You just chase things down. I'm not that animal. I'm like, I know. You're your own kind of animal. And I think that you are brave. And you're like, really? You see me as brave? I'm like, yeah, you're one of the bravest people I know. You're the one who got me into storytelling after all. I wouldn't have done it if you weren't here watching. And you thought about it for a minute and you're like, yeah, that's me. You're right. Okay, well, I'll tell you, but I'm not really ready to release it into the world. And just then you were leaning in to tell me, and two dogs came trotting down, and you stopped for a minute. You're like, no, I can't say it just yet. Wait till they go on by. I know these two. And instead of trotting by, they stop. They're like, hey, guys. I'm like, hey, how's it going, dogs? They're like, pretty good. Just making the rounds, going around the block, marking our territory. Think I'll, and you starts coming towards my chair. I'm like, not this chair. No, keep it moving. They're like, nah, we're just kidding. We wouldn't do anything like that. That's rude. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, I've seen some rude stuff before. So anyhow, what were you guys talking about? And I said, well, we were just discussing dreams. And they're like, oh, yeah, like you've had some dreams. I'm like, yeah, we all have dreams. I mean, things that we like to breathe into existence. And they're like, oh, yeah, what was one of yours, Wolf? I'm like, oh, me? I dreamed of telling stories. And they're like, well, that makes sense. You're a wolf. And how about you? And they looked at you and you're like, well, I was just thinking about some things. And they're like, nah, really, come on, tell us. You've known us for years. Tell us. And they started pressuring you to tell what it is you were thinking about getting involved in. And they're like, come on, don't be a chicken. Tell us what you're doing. It can't be that bad unless it is that bad. Is it bad? And you're like, no, it's not bad. It's just different. I mean, it's something new and different. And they're like, yeah, what is it? Come on, spit it out. And you're like, okay, sooner or later, I'm just going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and tell everybody. So I might as well start with you guys. All right. So, what it is I want to do is, I want to be a tennis player. And both the dogs leaned back and just started howling laughing. They're like, oh, are you kidding me? You want to be a tennis player? And you're like, yeah. And I just kind of leaned forward. I'm like, no, it's okay. That, you know what? Don't listen to them. And it was too late. They were off on a tear about all the reasons why you were not going to be a good tennis player. And you're like, well, I haven't even had a match yet. And they're like, yeah, and you probably won't. You won't. I mean, unless we set you up with our friend who's a really great tennis player. But yeah, I can't imagine things going well for you. And you're like, well, why not? No, seriously, what's wrong with me? Why other people play tennis and I think I'm a pretty good one. And they're like, really? How are you going to play tennis? You know, you're a snake. You don't even have arms or legs. And you kind of sat back and you looked at your body and thought about how inadequate your body was for the job as they were. You're like, well, I've played before. And I thought I felt pretty good playing. And they're like, yeah, who did you play against? A worm? I mean, come on. You can't play tennis. You don't have arms or legs. And I hate to bring this little factoid up, but your vision isn't so great either. Aren't snakes pretty much blind? And you're like, yeah. We are pretty. Okay, yeah, our vision's not great. It's true. And the dogs are just like, that's okay. Okay, you know what? This is going to be a good one. We're going to set up a little match for you with our friend. Why don't you just come on down to the tennis courts and we'll have it set up. And yeah, this is going to be good. All right. And they went trotting off. And I leaned in and I said, you know what? I think if you want to be a tennis player, you're a tennis player, regardless of what those dogs had to say. But you started losing all the shine in your eye and your head was dropping down a little bit because, you know, when you've got a new idea, you can't just tell everybody. It's got to grow legs before it can go out in the world. Because there's always going to be dogs out there ready to say terrible things. But the truth of it is, if you want to be a tennis player, you can be a tennis player. And I'm going to go to that match. And I'm going to witness you, my friend, playing tennis. And I can't imagine how much joy you're going to take in playing tennis. And I can't imagine how much joy I'm going to have telling a story about it later. Because you're a tennis player and I'm a storyteller. And you know, you perked up a little bit again and you're like, okay, well, I'll be there. I'm going to get on over there and I'll see you there tomorrow morning. And you tell the dogs they can go ahead and they can even place bets if they want to. That's how sure I am that I'm a good tennis player and I have a chance. And so sure enough, I told the dogs later, I said, you know what? I think you really hurt Snake's feelings a little bit on that one. But tomorrow, the match is still going to be on. And tomorrow, I'm going to put my bet on Snake winning. And they just laugh like, you have no idea who Snake is playing tomorrow. I'm like, okay, well, I don't care. My bet is always on the person who believes in themselves and believes they are who they say they are. Even if they question it sometimes, if they most of the time believe they are who they say they are, that's good enough for me. And so sure enough, the next morning we get out to the tennis courts and you're over stretching out your long limber body, getting ready for the match. And in comes your competitor. And the dogs are just snickering. And it's an octopus. They've brought an octopus. And he's got a racket in every tentacle. And you're like, oh man, this is a lot. I don't know if I can do this thing. And you really began questioning whether you could not only just play tennis, but beat an opponent at it. But that's what the game of tennis is about. And so the match began. And the octopus lifted up his racket and zinged one by you. And it just went whoo, right by your head. And you're like, that's okay. That's okay. I was just, you flicked your tongue. You're like, I was just getting my bearings. And then the next serve went. And everybody stopped. Because when you said you were getting your bearings, you had tasted the air. You took in every single element of the entire surrounding. You knew the direction of the wind. You knew how fast an item was traveling. You knew from the sound of the whistle exactly when that ball was coming. And you struck. And you shot that ball back so fast that it went past the octopus so fast that all his tentacles were all wrapped up in knots all about him, and he fell over. And this went on back and forth for, I don't know, until score was so many points in your favor that everybody out of mercy just called the game. Because you, as a snake, didn't need arms. You knew how to strike. And as a snake, your senses were so heightened, you didn't have to see a ball to know every single element before it ever got to you. And as a snake, you're the finest tennis player I've ever seen. And I hope that you find something in yourself that lets you believe in yourself the way Snake could as a tennis player. And I could as a storyteller. And you could as exactly who you are. And I'm so glad you joined me for this tale today. And I really enjoyed telling it. And I super look forward to telling you the next one. And I'll see you then. Bye.